We are on Mount Zion. But you want to know something? If you came just a little over 100 years ago and you came to Israel and you asked a Jew where Mount Zion was, you know what they would say? You see that building up there? That it's a church, the building with the... They would say that that is Mount Zion. And today it's still called Mount Zion. They never changed it. Across where we're staying is called the Citadel of David. If you went in there and did a tour, you know the first thing they would tell you? It's not the Citadel of David. It has nothing to do with David. Unfortunately, what most people don't realize, the same as last night, right? Most people don't realize from 1948 to 1967, there were no Jews in the Old City. Most people don't realize that after the destruction of the temple, from around the 2nd, 3rd century or so, for almost 1,000 years, no Jews were allowed in Jerusalem. So when they came back, they had to start guessing, what's this and what's that? And the only way that they found out that this was Mount Zion was because of a man that came here. He was a general in the army, the British Army. And as they were digging, and I'm going to show you where, we're going to go through the tunnel that was filled with dirt, they found a plaque at the end of that tunnel about how it was built. And they understood that that was Hezekiah's tunnel, which today we know it wasn't Hezekiah's tunnel. It was probably Ahab who built the tunnel. So you're always finding out more. That wall there, where the Wailing Wall is, that they said it has to be the Wailing Wall because it's built by Herod. Well, as they were doing digging there just in the last couple of years, the way you understand dating is, as you dig lower, if you find a coin at the base, you know that it can't be older than that, right? Because that's the base. Well, they found a coin there from 19 CE or 19 AD, which means Herod didn't build that wall. Herod died in 1 BC. So there's things they're finding out today. And like I said, 100 years ago, they didn't even know this is Mount Zion. And I think after watching that movie last night, you could understand a little bit better why Jews will never accept that that is Fort Antonio. Even if it is, it doesn't make a difference. Because it's giving up part of their history. That means people died for nothing. It's a mentality that has to be changed. The same as Christians. You know, why do 99% of Christians believe that Sunday is the day of rest when there's not one scripture that says it? Because it's tradition after tradition after tradition. So let's show where we are first of all. That's the Mount of Olives, right across from us. Right? Where Yeshua is returning. Right across above where the cemetery is, it's called the Mount of Offense. The Mount of Offense. That's where Yeshua was crucified, on the top of there. In between that mountain, the archaeologists, they found ashes from sacrifices that were done at the temple time. Because they used to do the temple sacrifices here in Mount Zion, and then they would take the ashes out to a clean place. So when Yeshua was crucified, every ash of every sacrifice ever done was right there at his feet. How exciting is that? So we're not going to get in too much of that, but that is all. Mount of Olives is a ridge, right? So all of it is the Mount of Olives that go across. We're now in the upper city of the city of David, Mount Zion, right? We're standing pretty much in the same area that would have been the northern tower. So I don't know if they knew it or not when they were building this, but this is where really standing in the northern tower of the city. We're going to go down in a few minutes down there, and that you could see the city itself. And we could talk about the dig that they did. There was a dig they were doing here for about 10 years. And I'm going to go through the excavation report to prove to you that that's where the temple was by their own words. And they even say it. They believe that it's the tower or the citadel of David, but it's not in the original Mount Zion. The original Mount Zion is on the other side of the Milo, which I'll show you. And Petra, do you have my... And if you look at this picture, you had basically two hills that were here. One was called the Akra, where we're going to be inside the Akra. That's the Canaanite city, right? The Jebus, in the Jebusite city. David overtook that city. I'm going to show you exactly how he did it and how Joab came in through the water shaft and overtook the city. Where we're standing here was called Ophel Hill, the Ophel. Between that was a area that was an empty area. So in ancient times, you would have to go down the Akra and go up onto the Ophel. There were just two hills. on the Ophel was where there was a threshing floor, as we know. And the threshing floor was where David bought that threshing floor to put the temple. The Bible tells us that Solomon built in the Milo, and we know it. Catherine Kenyon, one of the most famous archaeologists, came here in 1960 and identified the Milo. We know it from the fill. Milo is gold filled. And she filled that in Psalm 122. Jerusalem is a city built unto itself. Now, we're told in the book of Maccabees that the temple was on the Ophel, and everyone believes in that, and that the Akra was where David's citadel was, and that the Ophel, the Milo was to fill. Everyone believes that. And even though we know this is Ophel, and we know that that's Akra, and we know where the Milo is, they still say the temple is a third of a mile away, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, right? So, I'll pass this around. You could take a look at that. But the other thing is, when you're looking at it, where was the temple built? We know it's built on Akra, but what does the Bible tell us? Petra, do you have my papers?
Yes.
Can I have them, please? Because according to Scripture, Mount Zion and the Temple Mount is the same place. They're not two different areas. Psalm 48, a psalm for the sons of Korah. Great is Yahweh and exceedingly to be praised in the city of our Elohim, his holy mountain. Beautiful on high, the joy of all the earth, is Mount Zion, in the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Elohim is known in her strongholds for a refuge. As we have heard, so we have seen in the city of Yahweh of hosts, the city of our Elohim. Elohim establishes it forever. Walk around Zion, yea, go around all of it. Count its towers. Set your heart on its ramparts. Pass between its strongholds, in order that you may report to the coming generation. 2 Chronicles 5:2. Then Solomon gathered the elders of Israel and the heads of the tribes, rulers of the fathers of the sons of Israel, to Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the covenant of Yahweh from the city of David. It is Mount Zion. So the city of David is Mount Zion, and Mount Zion is where the temple was. And like I said, for several thousand years, they kept thinking Mount Zion is up there. So now they find Mount Zion. Nobody doubts that this is Mount Zion, and this is the city of David. Everyone, 100% believe that. Yet, because of the traditions, and like we saw in the movie, a lot of blood that was shed and a lot of heartfelt things, they do not want to accept that this is where the temple was, even though every proof shows it. So, you basically have the Mount of Olives. This is the Kidron Valley that's in between, right? Then you have the Mount Moriah, another ridge. All of this is part of Mount Moriah, the mountains of Moriah. Then you have the Trifonian Valley, where we walked through. That's where we came through. When we came here, it's on the other side of this hill. And then you have the upper city. So if you looked at it from the sky, it actually looks like a Hebrew shin. And the shin, every mezuzah that you see on the door, it has a shin for El Shaddai. So it's kind of interesting, even when you look from the sky, how it shows that way. Now, Josephus tells us several things about the temple. He tells us where the ridge of the temple was, that it was exactly 600 feet from ridge to ridge. Where we're standing here, to the end of the ridge on that side, is exactly 600 feet. Exactly. Not 590, not 602, but exactly 600 feet. Josephus tells us that from the southern wall of the Roman fort, coming this way, there was a, he called them two arms. They were two colonnades. So the Roman soldiers, if there's a problem here at the temple, that they don't have to run through the people, that they can come through those colonnades and come here. He tells us that it's exactly 200 meters from that colonnade to the temple. In the book, in Alat Mazar's book, Petra, do you have the book? And I'm going to go in more in the book later. But in this book, she tells us that the large stone structure they found is exactly 200 meters from the wall. So they're proving it themselves. How big was the temple, right? 90 feet by 30 feet. We know that that structure over there is exactly 90 feet long. We don't know how long it is this way because there's a house there. They couldn't build all the way the other way. So even all the dimensions, the Bible tells us there's a room on the side of the temple that's 7.5 feet, right? The room they found there is exactly 7.5 feet. Everything fits the Bible narrative perfectly. Josephus also says that the temple was on a crescent-shaped ridge. If we look here, and you could look on a map, do we have it on the map they're passing around? You'll see that the city of David is on a crescent-shaped ridge.
Do you want to show it?
No, well, no, they could just, as they're looking at it, they can see it. Josephus tells us that the towers, like the tower we're standing in, particularly the northern tower, was up to 450 feet high. You can't build a structure like that over there. It's impossible. That's a 45-foot skyscraper. But here, because of the Kidron Valley, you could see that it was step-stoned, and you could easily get up to 450 feet from down there. So every single thing of the evidence points to the temple being here, and beside that, the biggest thing was that the concepts, like I always say, find Yahweh's concept and it never changes, right? What is the concept from the Garden of Eden? Living water. There's 4 rivers that are coming out of Eden, right? One river is called the Gihon. The Gihon spring is right underneath us. So in the concept of Yahweh, like it talks about in Psalms 29, Yahweh sits above the waters. Yahweh sits on waters. That's why when you take a mikveh, it's got to be in living water. That's why when you do the sacrifice of the red heifer, it's got to be done in living water, right? It can't just be water coming from a cistern. There's got to be living water. So since Yahweh is associated with living water, it is inconceivable, because there's only one water source here, the Gihon. There's no other water source. There's a small well called Enrogel that's way down the other end, but the only main water source is the Gihon spring. Gihon means gusher. And during biblical times, every day or several times a day, it would gush up like an oil well. And it's called a siphon spring. There's only about 10 of them in the whole world. And this siphon spring, as the water would gush, would go across in the channel to the Mount of Olives into a gigantic chamber there. It would fill up the chamber all automatically, all from Yahweh. Man didn't have to do nothing. They didn't build it. It was like that. And then the water would come down from gravitation on its own. So, wow, you know, even the people that are into water systems can't believe it, that this is one of the most elaborate water systems in the world, and much of it is natural. So you would never build your temple anywhere but the main water source. And Aristeas and the historians that were there, that saw the temple, they tell us that. They say, you know, the Temple of Solomon was magnificent, but there's one thing about the temple that stood out. Underneath the temple was an inexhaustible spring of water that was there, that flowed from underneath the temple. There's only one source, Gihon. They said, but a third of a mile away, right over there, they said there were 57 cisterns. There's 57 cisterns there with piping and plaster on the piping where they used to bring extra water down that they needed from the cistern. So very, very clearly, he's telling us exactly, all you have to do is come here, read the account, and believe what you're seeing. A couple other things that are kind of interesting there. There's tombs on the other side here. Some of these tombs go back to the time of King David. You can see them that are in the rock and in the walls. And they found a tomb. Can you see it over there at around, well, maybe 1 o'clock? It's like halfway down, and there's like a hole in the wall there. Yeah. They actually found a tomb there from the time of Solomon, from a queen of Egypt. And they believe it could be the wife that Solomon married, you know, because he married the Egyptian queen to make an alliance with the king of Egypt. The other thing, if you look that way, you see where you see those big towers that are up there? There's 2 big towers that are straight up, straight ahead there. They called that the evil council, because when Jerusalem was destroyed, temporarily the Sanhedrin went up and was meeting up there. And as we know, the Sanhedrin in the biblical times was made up of people that weren't priests. People would buy into it, almost like politics today. So they called it the evil council. And a very interesting story, in 1948, when Israel became a nation again, the United Nations overtook that area that's called the area of the evil council. And they're still there today. They say they keep expanding the land, you know, they keep moving out. I don't know why Israel allows them to, but taking more land over there. So if you follow the Kidron Valley all the way around to the back end, it turns into the Valley of Gehenna, right? The Valley of Hinnon, or the Valley of Gehenna, where the Lake of Fire is. And even today, they're still burning refuge back there. If we have time on our walk, we'll probably see it. Because that building up there, straight ahead the church, you could see a gray dome on that church. That's the house of Caiaphas. We'll be there tomorrow. Where Yeshua spent his last hours on earth, where the high priest was. Another thing that Josephus says, that the high priest from his residence could see into the temple area, and you could clearly see he could never see over there, but he could see down here, so he could see all the time what's going on. They did some digging not that many years ago, but that area there where you see like little round circles of stone, they actually found the grave of Caiaphas there. So it's one of the reasons there's other things they found in the place to know that that was the place of the high priest. Does anybody have any questions before we go down so you can actually see the city and see the dig and some of the things there? Going quickly, because like I said, only a science of about 130 years or so. So the early archaeologists that didn't know everything they know today, how do you know pottery? If I show Yossi a piece of pottery, the way he'll know it is from other pottery that's been found. But if the original person was wrong in his estimation of the pottery, it's the same with evolution, right? The first person says, this is 4 million years old. And then everybody after that is basing it on a wrong assumption. So it's the same thing here, that they have a wrong assumption where the temple was and they're basing everything. The other thing that's very interesting is, this tower here, they found, was built by Nehemiah. And they admit that. Because how do they know it's built by Nehemiah? Because they went underneath where the tower is and they found pottery from Persia from exactly the time of Nehemiah. Oil lamps, pottery, all things from that time period that is nowhere else. They didn't find it anywhere else. So they know that that had to be one of the towers that Nehemiah built. What's interesting, if we read, where did Nehemiah build? Right? Nehemiah 3:13. Hanun and the dwellers of Zanoah made strong the valley gate. They built it and made stand its doors, its locks and bars, in 1,000 cubits on the wall to the dung gate. Where is the dung gate? On the southern side, on the bottom, where it goes into the valley of Hinnon or Gehenna, where they burn the garbage. Everything is logical. And then it says who made strong there, and then verse 15. And the fountain gate was made strong by Shulem, the son of Kol-Holza, the ruler of part of Mitzpah. Where is the fountain gate going to be? Where there's a fountain above the Gihon spring. And he covered it, made strong its doors and its bars, and the wall of the pool of Shiloh by the king's garden, and to the stairs that go down to the city of David. We're walking these stairs. So no doubt, well, he's telling you where they're building the walls is right here. Even mentioning the city of David, the stairs, and the pool of Siloam that's down there. And the fountain gate, across from them, they went up the stairs of the city of David at the going up of the wall above the house of David, even to the water gate eastward. So they're showing that if you read the book of Nehemiah, all the walls that are being built are right here. And they know it because they found one of the towers. And they're kind of amazed because they wonder, they said that the tower was specifically built here because of that structure. So why would he build a tower here in front of that structure unless it was the temple? Because remember, at the time of Nehemiah, right, the temple was built first when Cyrus allowed the people to come back, but then they had to build a wall around the temple to protect it because there were people that wanted to come in to destroy it. So it's amazing, it's a miracle that they can rebuild these walls in 52 days. Remember, Herod's temple was completely destroyed, right? Not Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was burned down, but not every stone was taken out of the wall. And we remember what happens. Nehemiah comes, where does he go? The Kidron Valley. His donkey can't get through because of all the stones. And then they got to carry those stones from the Kidron Valley and build this wall back up. So it is a miracle that can be done. And they didn't have many people in 52 days. But logically, think to yourself, if you had to include the area where Fort Antonia is, and it went miles around, it would be impossible that they could rebuild that in 52 days. The other thing that nobody has an answer for me is, all these stones are Solomonic stones, right? So, Solomon built the temple gets destroyed, and let's say half of the wall is broken down. The people come back, they take the stones, they build it back up. So what type of stones would you think you're going to find at the base of the temple from the wall? Solomonic stones, right? Over there, where Fort Antonio is, there are no Solomonic stones. The base of the wall are all Herodian stones. So they have proof. They know that Nehemiah built the wall, not Herod. And they know that he built it because they found the proof of it here. And yet over there is not one Solomonic stone. So where did they go? From the time that Nehemiah rebuilt this wall, and then Herod came and expanded the Temple Mount, right? And then things are destroyed after that. Where on earth did all the Solomonic stones go, if that's the Temple Mount? And I've never gotten an answer from anybody on that. So like I said, if you come here and you see it, it's very hard to give a lecture about this without being here. Because there's these little points that you have to see to be able to understand it. But when you come here, going by their own rule, what they say, we clearly see what it was. I'll read one or two more things here, and then we're going to get moving. I got to go upstairs now. They're opening and get the tickets first. In the book of Maccabees, 1 Maccabees 13:52, and we know the Maccabees were who? They were people who were during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, around 2nd century BC. They're the ones that are restoring, when they take and they defile the temple and they do the abomination of desolation, and they come back, they're ragtag fighters. They're from Moadim, that's more toward the airport. But they were here during the time of the temple. So when we're looking at that, we see that it says, he ordained, 1 Maccabees 13:52, he ordained also that day should be kept every year with gladness. They're talking about Hanukkah when it comes. He says, moreover, the hill of the temple, the Ophel, that was next to the tower or the citadel of David, he made stronger than it was, and there he dwelt himself with his company. So all the records tell us that the citadel and the Akra was alongside and next to the Ophel. So everyone admits now, because they were digging here for 20 years, we know that the citadel is here. They found it. So how on earth then can the Ophel be a third of a mile away? What would that make the Milo? It would be like a city you're filling in. It would almost be like a crater that had to be here, which would make no sense. But like I said, they already admit this is the Milo. That's not my theory. This is what the archaeologists are telling us. And I'm giving you from the report exactly what you're saying, that's disproving the end result. It's like telling you, yes, 2 + 2 is 5. So they're coming up with all the evidence, and they're just coming up with a wrong concept to the end of it. We also know from Revelation 22, we know from Ezekiel 47, what does it tell us? That when the third temple is built, that there's a river underneath the temple that comes up. It goes through the Arava that's right here, because around the other side of this, it's an Arava that goes down to the Dead Sea. It's 12 miles that goes down there, and it will make the Dead Sea fresh water again. So even all the scriptures tell us, Psalm 29, Yahweh sits above the waters. Everyone knew from the book of Genesis that living waters is connected with the Creator. Everything about him is about living waters, because you need water for life. You can go weeks without food. You can't go more than maybe a few days up to a week. Maximum without water, it would be impossible. So that's the concept. That's Yahweh's concept, that he's associated with living water. And that's why the mikvah is with living water. The sacrifices are with living water. The priest had to use living water before everything. And again, the only living water source that's here is the Gihon spring that is below us. Anybody have any questions? Yeah?
How can you tell the difference between the two stones? You're saying the ones here and the ones over there.
They could tell the stones by the way they're cut. Okay? Like you could see these stones here if you take a look at how the buildings were. And if you go over there, you'll see the Herodian stones are much larger stones, and they're all cut a certain way. Even in Hebron, when you see over there. So the stones in the building, they could tell by the structures. Also, the pottery that they find. Because as they find the pottery, then they know that the pottery is from a certain time. Like over here, all the pottery they're finding are from the time of Solomon. So they break it down into the Chalcolithic age. And then they have the Bronze Age, and then Middle Bronze Age, and then Late Bronze Age, and then they have the Iron Age, and then they have Iron Age 2. So by going at all these things, and then understanding, like, you read the Bible and you see that when Israel first became a nation, right, the Philistines kept attacking them. And why weren't they winning? Because before the Iron Age started, the Israelites had no iron weapons. Only the Philistines did. And the Bible even tells us that they used to go and take their plowshares, and the Philistines would sharpen them for a pim, whatever a pim was, but we know from something else we could tell what a pim was. So from those things, we can surmise. When you put it together, it's like a puzzle, and then they can tell when they're looking at it, and they're pretty accurate with it. You know, within a time frame. Sometimes when you have two eras that are overlapping, you could have 70, 80 years, even up to 100 years, where it's the same type of pottery or whatnot. But it's not 300, 400, 500 years, you know, that they can tell with pretty much accuracy. And the other things, like over here, they found 52 seals. They're written in Paleo-Hebrew. And the seals, two of the seals they found up there were from priests from the temple that the Bible mentions, from the book of Jeremiah. They just found in another room that they were digging underneath 52 seals from Israelite names. And they're feeling there was more of a connection with the Israelites coming here after the destruction. So again, you got to put all the pieces together. And what they didn't do years ago, which they do today, like Alat Mazar, it's very irresponsible for her to name this as David's palace without an ounce of evidence. And actually the evidence is the opposite. And if you talk to 90% of archaeologists, they'll say, it's nonsense. You know, and that's why even when they found the tabernacle of David, they were afraid to name it. And they said that because as I'm showing them all the evidence, they're saying, you're right, it's nothing else, it has to be. But they're cautious because if they put something out there and their name is to it, they can discredit themselves. Even Yossi, when I tell him about that being Fort Antonia, he half believes it. But he says, don't say that. They're going to think that you're racist. It looks as racist. He says, don't say that publicly. You know, it's going to look bad for you. Because it seems like I'm supporting the Palestinians against the Israelis. It has nothing to do with that. If they just listen to the whole sentence, they can build their temple here. They have this land, and this is where the temple was. You already have the foundation laid. Just take that big goop off the top and rebuild it. Any other question?
Exactly.
You're looking at the Milo. Like I said, this is all Milo, which means fill. Milo means fill. None of this was here. So from like where that wooden structure is, on the other side of that, there are walls there from the time of the Jebusites that go back at least 1500 BC. There was nothing here. We would be in a valley here, and then over here would be another hill called the Ophel. So with
Where are they in like that little pieces? Little.
this was structured. This was, if you remember in the Bible, when it talks about she lived in the wall, and you think, oh, I feel sorry for her, she lived in the wall. No, they built houses in the wall. From the top all the way to the bottom, it was all step-stoned. And they lived in these structures. As a matter of fact, if you look here, that's a toilet, which shows somebody very powerful lived here. And you can tell why, because you're next to the temple. The higher you are on the wall, the more closer you are to the king. The lower you're on the wall, the lower you are. So you're looking here literally at structures of buildings that people lived in. And it talks about people living in the wall. Remember it talked about the temple servants living in the wall of the water gate. That would have been more over that way. You know, because it wasn't so big on the top. The city of David is not gigantic, so they built all into the walls. And you can kind of see on the other side, because now, today, those structures are built into the walls. Not exactly the same way, but somewhat similar. They say they were about 5'2", 5'3", the average Jew. Don't know Israelites. I mean, we know King Saul was a foot above other ones, but they weren't a very, very tall race of people. They weren't Anakin.
Very powerful.
Oh yeah, very powerful. You know, when you look at somebody like one man being able to kill 2,000 or 3,000 people at one time, it's almost unheard of. But that's what David had. He had a real ragtag bunch of fighters. You know, if you ever saw the movie Braveheart, it was kind of like that. You know, when the guy, the Braveheart guy, Mel Gibson, is going out and he's finding all these people that have something against the British. Can I kill British? Yeah, come along. That's the way it was. He had some really, you know, bad people with him, but they were loyal to him, and that's what mattered. You know, people like Joab. Any other questions? If you do, think about it. I'm just going to go up. I want to get our tickets. I'll be back in about 5 minutes. So if you have a question, you could answer it. I'll answer it when I come back. Things. Look at these seals. These seals in the original Paleo-Hebrew. They found 52 seals in that area near the Milo. And remember the importance of a seal. That if a king sent a message, right, and he put the seal in there. Remember when David wanted to get rid of Uzziah the Hittite because of his sin? And he actually gave Uzziah the message with his own death. Now, why do you think he would give him that? What if Uzziah opened that up and read it and it says, Joab, get rid of this guy, right? But for two reasons. Number one, he trusted Uzziah. And he knew that he was an honorable man and he would not open that up and read it. The second thing is, if the king seals this, it's only sealed in wax. If you get to the person it's going to and that wax is broken, it's the death penalty. So this is what these seals were for, and now they found hundreds of them. You can see this man here is Charles Warren. He came here in the late 1800s. Like I said, he was a British general that came here, and he was the first one to find where we are. Let me get in the front here. We'll start walking. You're welcome to take pictures if you have cameras, but now we're going into Mount Zion. Okay, like I said, most of it was taken away back in the 2nd century BC. But now, the original Mount Zion, where Yahweh dwells, the Gihon Spring, where the tabernacle of David was, all of that. We're going in right now into the Mount Zion. Be careful, please, walking down the steps. In biblical times, this would have all been filled with water.
This was a cistern?
Not a cistern. This was the water tunnel. This is where all the water came from. You know, again, depending on the time of year, too. But it's like, wow. You know, this is the original rock. Yeah, this is from the time of David and before that. Watch your heads, please, if you're tall.
This is the pipe for water? Is this water pipe?
No, it's a pottery.
Yeah? Oh, this is the pot.
Yep.
The Euro's the pot.
Welcome to Mount Zion, the city of our Elohim. Yahweh dwells in Zion. You could stand on there. We're going to stay here a couple minutes. So if you want to stand on there, that's fine. The people can come in. Mount Zion, the city of our Hagim, our holy days, where the tribes come to gather. We are in Mount Zion. Please try to come in more, that people can come up as much as possible. Even Eric, if you come up a little bit on the steps, that people can walk on the steps. Josephus talks about all types of underground tunnels and things that were in Mount Zion where the temple was. So when you're looking at this system, they had no idea before they dug in the last 10-15 years how elaborate this water system was. That actually cities today, major cities around the world, are looking at how the water system was here to try to use it in major cities in India and these other places because of how elaborate it was. So when Charles Warren found the place, there was a young boy, Arab boy in the area, that actually happened to see the stone that talked about Hezekiah's tunnel. And that's what Charles Warren realized. This has to be Mount Zion. This has to be the city of David. This was all filled with dirt, all the way to the top. There might have been maybe a foot between the dirt and the top. Now remember, Gihon, the gusher, several times a day, gushes out with water, and all of this fills like a tsunami. It happens when you're down near the Dead Sea. It could look clear, but behind you could have flash floods. And every year, unfortunately, people die from that. So, somebody I think wants to get through. So if we could try to let him through, please, let's make some room here. So when Charles Warren came, people don't realize he risked his life.
You gotta go over.
Because if the water would have gushed when he was coming through here, he had to go on his crawl on his hands and knees to get through this tunnel. And it would take him at least an hour, maybe longer, when you're crawling. And if the water would have gushed during that time, he would have been dead. So he really risked his life coming through here at that time. But now you can see they took all the dirt out of here. Now, if you came here just 10 years ago, they would have told you, this is called Warren Shaft. They would have told you this is where Joab came up and took the city from David. Absolutely not true. Has nothing to do with it. I'm going to show you where Joab came in. They have, in the last 15 years, they've discovered things about the city and the water system that they never realized before. And like I said, the whole system here from the Gihon, being this special type of spring, that there's only about 10 of them in the world, and the way that the water would gush, it would fill, it would come down by gravitational pull, and how it worked just was simply amazing, how they did it. And that's why, if you remember that the Jebusites were mocking David, and they said, the blind and the lame can guard this place against you. Nobody's coming in here, because you're going to see the walls. They're massive and they're thick. And they thought they were safe. But David was smarter than that. David came around the water channel. He said, the first one to go in and will open up the doors for us will be general, and it happened to be Joab. And the key is, remember, the city was taken over, but it was never destroyed. It was conquered but never destroyed. So when David took it over, why reinvent the wheel, right? He took over the Jebusite city and just started living in it. But when we see the original Jebusite city would be the same place where David lived, and the Bible tells us where his palace was, not over there on the Ophel Hill. So let's keep continuing down here.
This is an honor because he knows this place. Yes, it's very. This is really an honor.
That is the northern wall of the Jebusite fortress, and that's why they never really understood what it meant by fortress, because it's natural rock. It might be 6 feet, that rock, all the way going up. So the point is, this is the end of the Jebusite city, right? So where we were before, near the Ophel, that is not part of the original Mount Zion. That was, like I said, later, the Bible tells us, that David found a hill where there was a threshing floor across from Mount Zion, which they called Ophel Hill, and he bought it for the temple. Solomon filled that up where we showed you the Milo. He made it into one structure, and then he built the temple on the Ophel. But we are now in the Opera. We are in the citadel. We are in the fortress of Mount Zion. So this is where the Bible tells us David would have lived. He lived in the fortress of Zion. He did not live on the Ophel. So right there will tell you that cannot be the palace of David. And again, she has no proof, and she even admits it in her book. Well, it could be the temple, but then we'd have to change everything. It's like, yes, please. We're in the area where they believe this is where Solomon was coronated king. You can see the pool here, right, that they dug out. This is the Canaanite pool. And we will be on the other side of this wall in the original water system. We're not going to go into the water tunnel, which they always told us Hezekiah's tunnel, until this day. Now they know it's not. Because they found coins and things earlier, and pottery earlier. So what they thought was Hezekiah's tunnel was actually probably built by Ahab. And if you look on the plaque that's actually in the Turkish museum, it never mentions Hezekiah. But the Bible talks about Hezekiah with a pole and a wall, and they put it together, but it literally wasn't Hezekiah's tunnel. So we're going to go in the original Canaanite tunnel. It's dry, so you don't have to worry about it, but we're going to walk through that tunnel. I'll show you the area. It's on the other side of this wall, but that's the door that Joab would have came through. This would have all been filled with water, so he would have had to actually come through. They block it with a big stone. You could see the stone that's cut out. He would have had to take it away, come through, swim up, and then come up to the top and open the gates for all the soldiers to come in. But again, the Bible tells us they didn't fight back. Once they got in here, they didn't fight back. But all of this is original rock. This is all part of the original fortress of Zion. We're going to go through, we'll watch a little movie for a minute or two, and then we'll continue. Itself, how big it was. They had a double casement wall that was here. And this is going all the way from the top of the city all the way to the side. Wow. When they dug this out, they had no idea. They had no idea. When it was called a fortress, you know, many things can be called a fortress, but they had no idea of the magnitude of the size of it. And that's why I said, like I said, they thought they were impregnable because the mountain itself was also. Like I said, when we were on the top of that outlook a few minutes ago, you could look all the way down, and all of that would have been stone. It's all a natural fortress. So if people are trying to climb up that wall in those days, you just shoot darts at them, you pour hot oil, whatever it is. It's very hard to take a place that's like this. You know? So it should be about another 30 seconds or so. I think it's on automatic. It'll come down. The movie will show. It's just about a minute. It kind of reenacts what Mount Zion looked like.
אז בסדר, יכול להיות שהוא יתקדם, לא משנה, בסדר גמור. העיקר שהיה פתוח שלו. טוב, אחלה, יאללה, יום טוב, ביי.
Come down.
No, in biblical times, this one was covered. This was all over. Yeah, except for where like that and the garage is starting. Where they were covered. But this was all covered. You'll see it when they That's what we're. And in the movie, they actually do it right. Yeah. And then you get there and you see it's done it all the way. And then we're going to go into the other tunnel.
Yeah, here it is.
But remember where I told you where Solomon was quarantined? It's right above us. And then
This is still part of the
they took him down to Gihon, and it says that they took the outflow from the tabernacle of David.
Oh, they just showing the way to the water.
I've been there, it's not public, it's open.
It's the dry cave, huh?
Yes.
Don't go to this one. Yeah, I will.
Mr.
You're just the one doing all this thing.
Now we're stuck.
That only. What?
Is it very deep?
What's that? Opposite the Arab village.
Between the Fort Antonius and the temple was an area in between there where, I'm trying to remember what they called it. The difference, you know, that there's one temple.
So every time they are making sacrifices, people is to come and play this.
Yeah, because outside the temple was the altar of sacrifice, and that's where they would cut the animal's throat, and they would take the animal up there. But then after they would burn the animal, they would take all the ashes across to the Mount of Olives, to what is called in the Bible the clean place, which is the place of appointment. Why is it the place of appointment? Because the Lamb of Yah slain from the foundation of the world. From that time, from the Garden of Eden, it was set up that that's where Adam was cast out, that's where Yeshua had to die. Because if you look at where Yeshua died, it's exactly 500 cubits, which is exactly outside the camp. If you look from the middle of the Holy of Holies, and it was a circle in that time, when you had the tabernacle, 500 cubics outside of that is outside the camp. So when you had to take your waste, when you went to the toilet, you had to do it outside the camp. When you were unclean, you had to go outside the camp. And Adam and Eve were cast where? Outside of Eden, outside the camp. So when Yeshua had to die, he had to die exactly where they were cast out of, the second Adam. And that's why when he's coming from Bethany on the other side, what does he see? A fig tree. And what does he say? Let no one ever eat your fruit again. And I believe in the Garden of Eden. It doesn't say it's a fig tree, it just says fruit. But as soon as they ate it, what did they do? They grabbed fig leaves, and so at least one tree had to be a fig tree. And I believe they were probably both fig trees. Because if one was a fig tree and one was a pomegranate tree, then maybe it was, ooh, that looks better. But if they were both exactly the same, then it only comes down to obedience. That tree you eat, that tree you don't. Has nothing to do with anything else. And like it says, Yahweh never tempts man. Does everybody have the toilets?
Only the fig tree has big leaves. They say that Israel so that they could cultivate.
Yeah, it depends on the fig tree too. So I don't know if it was because they're big leaves, but what I'm saying is, if all of a sudden I realized I was naked now, I'd grab the first leaf. I don't care how small it is. You know, you're going to grab anything that's close to you, right? You're not going to go running around looking for a big leaf. You're going to grab anything to cover yourself, and that's the point of it. That once they realized they were naked, they realized they did not have a covering. And that's why in Scripture we need coverings, right? You have the husband, the covering of the wife, the pastor's the covering in the congregation, the man the covering over the woman. It's all part of judicial order, you know, and it's you see it in the whole temple system that they had. So now we're going to walk, still going south. We're going to go now to the pool of Siloam. And it's very special because remember during Sukkot, there was a special ceremony that was done. The priest would come down to the pool of Siloam and he would get water and do an oblation of water. And I've came several times with Gershom Solomon, who actually was one of the ones that was originally on the Temple Mount. He wasn't in that movie, but he was one of the 6 of the first ones on the temple. And I went with his organization and they had a Kohanim priest, a real Levite, that we would come down to the pool of Siloam and do this ceremony during Sukkot. So we're going to go there now because there's some new things they just... Okay, the gate is closed here. We're going to have to walk around. Some of you may think I wish I took plan A. We do wilderness tours, usually not 40 years, but about 2 or 3 days. And it's wonderful. You feel Yahweh in the wilderness like no other place, but the sand and the dirt, when you get out of there, you're kind of happy to be back in the promised land. So here's a replica of the Shiloah inscription that was at the end of what was traditionally known as Hezekiah's tunnel, which now they don't believe Hezekiah built it. And this was how they knew it was the city of David. But remember, when they found this in the late 1800s, this was still controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So this inscription today is where? It's in the museum in Turkey. And actually, if you go to that museum, you won't see it. They have it hidden in the back room. But I was told if you give 50 euro, the guard will take you in the back and he'll show you the inscription. So I'm showing you for nothing. I'm not asking for 50 euro. And that's the way it looked. But let me read it. The tunneling is completed. And this account of the tunneling, while the hewers were swinging their axes, one group toward the other, with 3 cubits yet to be hewn, a man's voice was heard calling out to his fellow worker. For there was a zeta, an issue, or a fissure rather, in the rock of the right to the left. And on the day of the tunneling, the hewers bore through, one man toward the other, axe upon axe, and the waters flowed from the source of the pool. 1,200 cubits, and 100 cubits was the height of the rock above the head of the hewers. So again, it doesn't say anything about Hezekiah. People just assumed, because it said Hezekiah fortified the city so that the water wouldn't be by the enemies. But now they found out it's Ahab who built this during that time. The amazing part of the story is that tunnel is 2/3 of a mile long. And it's completely dark. You can't see the hand in front of your face. And we used to go in there. You can't go in without water shoes because the water is there, and you can't go in without a flashlight. You have to have some kind of flashlight. So when we would go in with a group, at a certain point I would tell everybody, turn out your light. And I mean, it is like, it is darker than dark, you know? And think about this. These people, from 2/3 of a mile long, one starts digging one end, one starts digging the other end with no compasses, no nothing. And they come within 2 or 3 feet of each other in the middle. In solid rock, you're digging with a chisel. Can you imagine? So it's a miracle even how it was built. Some of the tunnel you got to walk through like this, you know, other parts are higher, but it's an adventure if you like that and you want to go through it. Sometimes it's up to you. But praise Yahweh, about 8 years ago, they have the original tunnel and now we can come through like we did on the dry side. And if you go through the water tunnel, you won't see any of this. You come out all the way down at the pool of Siloam. So let's keep continuing now around the top. We're going to have to go up the steps. To breathe. But also, this is the area, if you look behind you, where the tombs of the kings were. You remember in the Bible where it talks about, and he was buried with his father in the tombs of the kings? This is where it's at. And I'll tell you a little secret that not many people know. David Seelef, who took over for Ernest Martin. Ernest Martin wrote the book, The Temples Jerusalem Forgot. The temple being in the city of David is not my idea. I never came up with it. I heard it from Ernest Martin. I read the book, and I was open-minded. I kind of believed it at first, but if it wasn't true, it wasn't true. And now I've been studying this for about maybe 17 years, something like that. And everything that comes up is more evidence that it's true. But the man who took over for Ernest Martin, David Seelef, from the Ascalon website and the foundation there, I got to know him. He's come here. I've taken him around Israel several times. And what we're trying to do is, he has special equipment, sonar equipment that can look underground. And he has a book, a theory, I don't know if he wrote it or another guy, of where David's tomb actually is. And he believes it's over here somewhere. You could read the book if you want to get the theory. But we want to get permission from the Antiquities Department to do sonar digging here that we can find the chamber. Because in the chamber of David, it would be very interesting. Because what was buried with kings in ancient days? Treasures, right? Sometimes you might find treasure in there. Depending how David was buried, I'm sure he wasn't mummified like in Egypt, but you would find different things. But there's something that the Bible tells us that every king was supposed to do that could be in his grave. Torah. The Torah. Every king was supposed to write the Torah in his own hand. Now, most of them didn't do it, but my surmise would be David did. And that would be possibly in there. So it would be great if we could find that. We're not going to Hebron on this trip, but I'll tell you a very short story about it from there. Because in Hebron, they believe it to be the tombs of the kings there. And you can go there, and when you go inside, it would look like coffins. Like when we go tomorrow to David's tomb, it's not his tomb. What you see that looks like a coffin is just for the illusion. It's a box built. But behind there is a cave, and supposedly his body was in the back of there. You know, that was moved from here to over there. So those are the two theories on it. But in Hebron, it's the same thing. We know that Abraham was buried there with Sarah. We know that Isaac was buried there with Rebekah. And we know that Jacob was buried there with Leah and the other one.
Rachel.
No, not Rachel. Rachel died, remember, on the way?
Joseph.
No, with Leah. Leah. There's 6 of them there. It was Leah. So anyway, that area in Hebron is Palestinian controlled. So just like here, it's very difficult to dig in areas where the Palestinians controlled the area. So what happened is, once a year, for a few days, they open the Muslim side to Jews, because when you go inside the place, it's split in the middle. One side is for Muslim, one side is for Jews, and most of the time it works, believe it or not. There's not a lot of things that happen within it. But once a year, they close the Jewish side and let Muslims come on there, and they close the Muslim side once a year and they let the Jews come on there. So these Jews that were religious, they had to set up, because actually when you go in there, what you'll see is, you'll see this little glass thing, and there's a lock on it, and underneath there's a staircase going down, and it's underneath where the real cave is, where the tombs are. On the top, you just see above where they're buried, you know, for the visual effect. So these settlers decided, you know what? When it's our turn to go in there, those cops, they don't want so much. We're going to get down there, and we're going to look. So what happened? They broke the lock, right? They usually had like rugs that are over there. And they opened it up, and they got downstairs, and they're getting ready to go into the cave, you know, and all of a sudden, the police, the Muslim police, they see, what's going on here? Somebody broke that lock, you know, and it's like, if you ever seen the movie Sound of Music, when they blow the whistle, and they all come running, that's what happens. So they come running there, and they get him, and it caused really a big disturbance. But now the problem was anything disturbed? So they decided, the Arabs and the Jews together, that they would send a team of, I don't know if it was 5 or 6 archaeologists that would go down there and that would check in that cave to make sure that nothing was disturbed. So there's an inner cave. First is like just a hallway, and then there's an inner cave, and then there's an inner cave where the bodies are. When they went into it's almost like the temple, you know, the outer court, the inner court, and the Holy of Holies. When they went into the inner court, they found in there many olive oil lamps and things from the time of King David. So they know at least from the time of King David, they believed that that was where Abraham was buried. They found pottery, they found all kinds of other things. But the interesting part was, when they went into that room, they said that all of a sudden, this wind and this noise came from like nowhere. And they got so scared they ran out of there. And nobody's been in there since that time. But the key is this. If they went in there and they were able to see 6 bodies, what would be evidence in your mind that that was the place where the prophets were buried? Because there's something different about one of the bodies.
Jacob's coffin.
Yeah, Jacob was mummified, remember? Jacob died in Egypt, so Abraham and Isaac and their wives were not mummified. They were just buried in there, so you would see wrappings or whatever. But you would find one mummy. You would find one coffin that was mummified. And again, it would be another biblical proof. So a great place. Some years we get to go there. We haven't been there in a couple of years because since about 2 years ago, there's really been a lot of violence in Hebron. There's always violence, but now there's more violence. So a lot of it is closed off. It's not really available, but again, when they open it one of these years. So let's continue now. From the Tomb of the Kings, we're going to go to the Pool of Siloam. Going all the way to the western wall. So again, you know, if you want to bail out, now is the time, but we could meet you on the other side. You know, we could. I'll see if I can give somebody. Petra, are you going to go to the other side? Or no?
Later in life. What do you mean by the other side?
No, are you going to meet us near the wheeling
Yes,
pool? Where
yes,
okay.
yes.
Because, let me give you this then. Because when you go to the Davidson Center, if you say, well, our group is over there, you need something. Give them that receipt. Tell them your husband is the guide. And we're the people that didn't want to walk through, and we're going to meet them over there. Okay. So, like I said, if we were here 10 years ago, I would be telling you, we would actually be coming out over there, and I would be showing you a little Greek Orthodox pool and saying that is the Pool of Siloam. I'll tell you the story here in a minute. I just want to see if I have. You're digging. Ronnie Reich is one of the most famous archaeologists in Israel. He headed the whole thing for the city of David for almost 20 years. And one of the people that lived here, they were having a problem with their sewage. And they kept calling the city and saying, look, our sewage is backing up. You got to do something about it. So finally they send out a big backhoe to come here and start digging this out, and they're going to put new sewer pipes in here. So the archaeologist happens to be down here. And again, like I said, when you're an archaeologist, you have heightened hearing. And as they're digging, all of a sudden he hears a scrape. And when he hears that scrape, he says, wait, stop digging. And he runs over, he shows him his badge, and this is where they were digging right here. So again, when he heard the scrape, he knew that there had to be stones. And what they did was they uncovered the real Pool of Siloam. And what they figured out here, you can read it down here. See, you can see the nice pomegranates up there, huh? And the fig tree. All of this was part of the Pool of Siloam. This is owned by the Greek Orthodox, so they cannot dig all of this out. But when you look at this, look how massive this is. And there's pictures inside too, beside over here, that show you how big this pool is. But they say it was the world's largest mikvah. That 10,000 people could mikvah in here. And when he said that, the world's largest mikvah, it hit me, wow! Because there's stairs over here that go back up to the temple. They haven't excavated yet, it's closed. We're taking the water, the sewer system. But next to the sewer system, if they ever dig it out, are the stairs that go up to the temple. So logically think to yourself, why are you mikvahing? For cleansing, right? Because you're unclean. You can't go into the temple unless you're clean. So would it make any sense whatsoever that you would mikvah here and the temple would be miles away all the way somewhere else? Absolutely not. You would mikvah here, and then you would take the steps up to the temple, and then you would mikvah. They found some interesting things also while they were digging over here. One was a a little like stela. I have it on my, I'll show it to you when we get home. I have it in my yellow folder. It's like a little pottery stela, and it says purified to Yah. And what the archaeologist theory is, if he was here, he would be telling you he believed that after they mikvahd, you would get one of those little things that say purified to Yah, because when you go up there, how can they prove if you were mikvahd or not? I kind of don't like that theory, and I'll tell you why. They only found one of those here. You know widow's mite? You know the story of the widow's mite? You know, people out here, they'll sell it to you for $20. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of widow's mite. You can find them anywhere. We have a couple of widow's mite. Because it's the smallest coin. It's like today, if America was destroyed, in 1,000 years from now, you'd find all pennies. Because it's the... So if really these were used as a purification to the temple, there would be a lot more than one that was found. They would be common. What I suggest is it was probably something with the priest being purified. But it has the name Yah. Yod Hey is right on it, which makes it really neat. They also found here the very first, outside the Bible, mention of Bethlehem. They found pottery shard from the time of King Ahab that talked about Bethlehem and the king, and it was something with paying taxes to the king. And it was in Paleo-Hebrew, the first time they ever found the word Bethlehem outside of the Bible. So there's a lot of really, really neat things, but they find the pool of Siloam. So think about this, at feast time, if you're a pilgrim and you're coming up, and you're coming here, this whole thing would be a gigantic mikveh. You know how small mikvahs are. They found thousands of them. They're usually for one person. You go in and you come out. So a mikvah right below the temple that's this big would show you, because there had to be purification. You would not allow it on the Temple Mount unless it was purified. So again, the fact that where they find it shows the proof of where the temple had to be. I'll just read one small scripture on it. John 9 and verse 6. Saying these things, he spat on the ground and made clay out of the spittle, and anointed clay on the blind one's eyes. And he, Yeshua, said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which translated is sent. So literally, it's the pool of the ones that are being sent. Why? Because they're purified. Then he went and washed, and he came seeing. John drop down to 37 and 38. He says, if any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believes in me, as the scripture says, out of his belly will flow rivers of living water. And now, unfortunately, there's not water in here, but if you came in the winter, after a rain, I could be swimming right now. That water fills all the way past here. So, you know, it's amazing the time of the year. We have not had a good year for rain. The Sea of Galilee is way, way down. And there possibly could be water in there, though. I think they actually fill it from the Gihon. Can anybody see there? See? See? Can you see? Is there water in there? Yeah. So if you want to look, and even the people that are leaving, if you want to come with us, just down this hallway. And when we get into the part of the sewer system, you can walk back up here, and then
when you first go in there, man, you go all the way, it goes all the way to your waist, that first step.
can you see over here? Look, this is one of the stones from the drainage tunnel that we're going to go in. So Rome was actually the very first civilization to make sewers. And if you remember in Rome, you remember what happened in Rome? When in 66, when they had the Great Fire, when Rome burned, and Nero blamed the believers, many of the believers went into the sewer systems to hide. And over here, Josephus talks about it in this very sewer system, that happened during the revolt, and how many people they burned them out of here and killed them. And they found about 166 bones of bodies. So the story all fits in there. But, you know, you need the sewer system. Why? Because you get rats, once you break down with garbage and you don't have proper area to get rid of waste, you have all other kinds of problems that start. So still, everybody continue. We're going to go in until we hit, I'll tell you when to turn back. But we're going on the original first century road that the pilgrims would have taken at the mikvah, ascending up to the temple.
Focusing on what remains.
Oh. Now think about it, right? Like I said, in archaeology, there's only one way to go, down. So every level you go, you see. Now look where the street is, right? So let's say you were here when they started digging this out 10 years ago, and you're at the street. As they do that level, maybe they find things from the Crusaders in the year 1000. Then they go deeper and they find things from the Arabs from 700. But once you get to bedrock, right, this is the first level, and it's first century. What does it tell us? That's the oldest level. This is when it was built. So if I found a coin here that said 19 AD, I know it had to be built 19 AD or past there, because you're at the bottom level. So that's the way when you're looking at it level-wise that you can see. But look how much, what does that tell you? In 2,000 years, that's how much all the debris and everything got up there. So that's what you're seeing up there. And it's, believe it or not, although the old city really does have the old feel, it's the same thing. Most of the old city is not ancient, those streets. Although I can show you some that are Roman roads. When we go to House of Caiaphas, I'll show you a Roman road that's there. But you're walking, and only in the last couple of years, they uncovered it. Look behind you, that's the Polisailo. That's the way it looked. Like I said, that's a mikvah, a tiny little, where one person's supposed to go in and out. That's a mikvah, where people would come by the thousands to purify. So let me go a little bit further here, and then the other can go back.
Just the tunnel.
Very much helped the Jewish people and had a gigantic palace there. They found many, many things. The biggest stash of gold coins they ever found, hundreds of them. And some of them are in the museum, some of them are in the labs being reconstructed. But they found a lot of stuff there. But again, not really biblical, you know. But it is big palace and many things. So what we're going to do now is we're in the second tunnel. We're going to continue up. And when we come out of here, we'll be near the western wall. But I'll point you out because I told you, Fort Antonia, which is called the Rock, because it's built on a 75-foot precipitous rock. So the whole thing is a rock. And what they did was they put flagstones around the rock and they built a platform to it. We're going to see here where they uncovered the base of that rock. So we'll see the base of the rock of Fort Antonia. I'll also show you when we get toward the end, near the what they call the Western Wall, where they found the coin that proves Herod did not build that wall. The coin is from 19, Herod died in 1, and also they found there, very rare, a Roman sword, a big sword, like a 3-foot sword that they also found there near that wall. So let's continue going. Mariah, you stay with me, sweetheart.
For all the uses that they could use it for, but not for waste. Most people in those times did not have indoor toilets. You go outside.
The Temple Mount, what they're calling, the Haram Es-Sharif, there's a gigantic rock up there we know from the Dome of the Rock, and we know that rock is 58 feet by 51 feet. That's the outcropping of a 75-foot precipitous rock that's here. So the rock starts here and goes all the way up 75 feet. And like I said, what Herod did was he put flagstones around it and they kept the top of the rock out. And they had a pagan temple that was up there. And then, like I said, during the time of Herod, that's where the prisoners would ascend on top of that rock and give their testimony, in their defense. And later, by the 2nd, 3rd century, they saw footprints in that rock, and they said, oh, these are the footprints of Yeshua. And that's why they built a church around the rock, the Church of the Holy Wisdom. And all the churches at that time, they were all octagonal. Even where the house of Peter or the mother-in-law lived in Capernaum. Originally, it's just a little round house, but when they expanded it in the 4th century, it's octagonal. Because the resurrection was on the 1st day or the 8th day. So all the churches, they started making octagonal. And if you look at the Dome of the Rock, it is not a mosque. Everybody admits that. No mosque is made like that. No mosque is octagonal like that. Because it was a church that was destroyed by the Persians, and then they turned it into a mosque after that. Even all the displays that are on there. And on that rock, and I do have pictures of it back at the place, you can even see crosses crossed into the rock. Because it was a church for several hundred years that was there. And the pilgrims, like the Bordeaux pilgrim and the pilgrims that came here, they all say that. They all say that that was where the Fort Antonia was. Nobody says it was where the Temple Mount was. And like I said, because the Temple Mount is Mount Zion. And not 1,000 years ago or even 500 years ago. Only 100 years ago did they realize where the real Mount Zion is. But again, it takes a long time to change tradition thinking. But you're seeing now the base. Here's a cistern that's underneath us, of course we're holding water. But this is the base of the rock of the Fort Antonia. So let's continue here. Okay, we are now at the Western Wall. That's where we're coming out here. This is the Western Wall that comes here. So you can see these are Herodian stones, but they're not built by Herod. Because for years I knew that wherever the temple was, there had to be stones from Solomon at the base because Solomon built the temple. And when the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, they didn't completely destroy the walls. They burned down the walls, but then as we know, we read it, when Nehemiah came back, Nehemiah built the walls with the Solomonic stones. So wherever you find the place where the temple was rebuilt, you have to have Solomonic stones at the base. And every time I'd ask for years, they'd say, well, we don't know. These stones go down another 30 feet, 60 feet, maybe 100 feet. And yeah, at the bottom there has to be Solomonic stones. Well, about 5 years ago, they dug to the base. You can see it right here. And there are no Solomonic stones. This is bedrock. There are only Herodian stones here. So this cannot be the temple, where the temple was. Because where did all those stones go? There's nothing that's recorded between the time of Ezra and Nehemiah and between the time of Herod in those couple of hundred years that somebody came and took thousands and thousands of stones away and just rebuilt the wall from nothing, from built stones. But it's interesting that you can see this wall is also an amazing wall because there's no mortar here whatsoever, like the pyramids. And if you look, every stone is about so many centimeters out from the stone before it. Some of these stones at the base, I think they say more than maybe 100 tons, something like that. You wonder, how did they even bring them? That's another whole theory of on rollers and carts and how did they get it up by elevation and whatnot. But we're at the retaining wall of the Fort Antonia, which they believe is the retaining wall of the temple. The other thing that's interesting, though, is there's a scripture that talks about, I think it's in Zechariah, about rebuking Judah for their paganism, and it says, and their back is always bowing. And that's what happens. Yahweh's temple is built in the west because all the pagan religions all worship the sun to the east, right? So Yahweh does it the opposite, where you're not looking at the east, you're looking at the west. And nothing in the Talmud, the Mishnah, anything ever talks about a western wall being something of importance, even if it was where the temple was, right? So what they're doing is they're actually bowing down to the east. Their back's always bowing. And it just makes no sense why they would do that, because like I said, even if it was the temple would be facing toward the west. And that's why another thing with the tabernacle of David that they found, which again was some kind of temple, they didn't know what it was at first, But that was another thing that mystified them because it wasn't facing to the east, it was facing toward the west, so they knew it wasn't paganism. There was no etchings or carvings of any kind of idolatry there. And the standing stone, again, had no faces to it or nothing. It was just a slab stone that was there, that they knew it was to mark something that was very holy, but that it was something to Yahweh. It wasn't something. And the only thing that is even remotely similar is down in Arad. The temple in Arad is similar, which is around the same time period. From the Kenites, at the time of King David, that was built at the same time of the tabernacle of David that's over here. So, pretty neat. So let's go to the top, we'll go out, we'll see a few more things now in what we're called today. From where I'm standing, directly ahead, there's like 2 trees, and in between those trees there's a person on a
Yes.
porch.
Oh, yeah.
That's where we were this
That's where we
morning.
were this morning.
That's the city of David. That's the outlook that we went into is right over there. So that's why I say that you'd have the fort here, 200 meters would be the colonnades, and it would end up right over there. Now, it said that there were 2 gates to the temple, the Holden gates, one to come in and one to come out. Remembering, if you went in one gate, you have to come out the other gate. And over here they have 3 gates that you see over there. So, because it doesn't fit, the next thing they say is, you know what? It must have been 2 sets of 3 gates. It doesn't say that anywhere, you know. So there's another set that's blocked of another 3 gates. But no, the Holden gates were 1 gate to come in, 1 gate to come out. So we're standing on the steps that would be going up to the fort. And what's interesting about these steps, there's a story in the book of Acts which talks about, remember when Paul came to Jerusalem and he came to the temple and all of a sudden someone yelled out and said, "Hey, isn't he the one? Look, he brought a Gentile into the temple," which he never did. And the next thing you know, they come and they mauled him and they started beating him up. And then what happens? The police come running out of Fort Antonia, which would have been right here, and coming down, and they're taking Paul, and they're thinking he's some kind of Egyptian. And they're saying, he's the Egyptian that did that. And then Paul starts talking to them in Greek, and then they're thinking, he can't be the Egyptian. And then they're wondering who he is, and he says, "Can I speak?" And they give him permission to speak, and he holds his hand out, and then he starts speaking Hebrew to the people. And he starts telling them about their forefathers and what they did, and that how, what happened to the Shua. And the next thing you know, they start beating their chests, and they start screaming and yelling. And that's what they said. They take Paul through the gates into the Fort Antonia. And this is where he would have stayed. And then from there was a plan to come and kill him in the night. So they were taking him down to Caesarea. And the Bible tells us that they sent 400 soldiers with him to Caesarea. Now logically think to yourself, when they're always telling you about the temple, they always make Fort Antonia this tiny, tiny little place. So they tell you there's only about 600 soldiers. And logically, 600 soldiers could not control 1 million Jews in that day. It's impossible. And if you look in the Bible, a cohort of soldiers was 6,000 to 10,000. It wasn't 600. And logically think, if there's only 600 soldiers in the fort, and they don't even know who Paul is, he's nobody, would they send 400 soldiers with him to Caesarea and leave this place, the most important place, with no people there? So like I say, if you just logically think about it, it really doesn't fit from the biblical perspective. But a very special place, because right on these steps was exactly where Paul was taken and where he addressed his Jewish brothers and sisters and where he was taken to prison from. So I think what we'll do is, if you want to walk around, you're welcome to. We can take maybe a 10-minute break if you want to walk around, and then we'll just meet here.